Welcome back to this week's Parent Parsha series, Parshat Vayechi. I wanted to take a minute to actually think about together really where we're up to in this week's Parsha. We're about to finish Sefer Breshit, and we're coming to the end of Yaakov's life. And Yaakov has taken up the bulk, and his family have taken up the bulk of Sefer Breshit. And Yaakov is a complex person. I was listening to a Kol El Yom Rishon shiur that was given this past Sunday by Penina Bernstein, and she had a thesis on the brachot that Yaakov give to his children. But one of the things that she points out in this week's Parsha and about Yaakov as a personality is that the test that Yaakov experienced, and really Yaakov's whole life, is about his humanity. Then we think back to Abraham, and we think back to Yitzchak, and we think back to the Nisyonot, the tests that they were given. They are not tests that we can relate to, or that maybe we're even supposed to relate to. They figure as personalities that in some capacity are human, but also maybe lamala min hateva. We think about the fact that Yitzchak could never leave Israel, even that somehow because of the experience that he went through on the Akedah, that he was forever changed in his own experience in terms of how he related to people, in terms of his relationship with Hashem. We think about Abraham as being somebody who was the father of monotheism, and the great lengths that he as a personality went through, and the tests that he went through that were outside of the scope of what we as people experience on a day-to-day basis. But Yaakov's tests, and this is not to take away from Yaakov's greatness at all, but I think maybe in some ways actually enhances his greatness. Yaakov's tests are and experiences of life are about being human, challenges of being human, and having a divine connection to God. And in that way, I don't think that it's lost that it is through Yaakov, through his humanity, through his challenges, through his struggles that we've watched over the last few parshiot, whether it's his struggles in his marriages, whether it's his struggles with his father-in-law, whether it's his struggles in his honesty, his brother, his own relationship with his father, whether it's his struggle with his children and how he parents. We look at all of these challenges and struggles that he has, and we come to the end of his life and recognize that it's because of these struggles, because of this humanity that Yaakov embodies, that he creates the Bnei Yisrael. And there's a reason why we are called Bnei Yisrael. We're not Bnei Abraham, Bnei Yitzchak, we're Bnei Yisrael. We're the children of humanity. We're children of humans, of people who struggle, who challenge, who maybe don't always have a smooth relationship, whether it's in their emunah b'Hashem, whether it's in their relationship with their children, whether it's in their relationship with themselves, whether it's in how they struggle with their own strengths and their own weaknesses. And I think one of the pieces that I kept coming back to in this week's Parsha is really this thinking about, as we're coming to the end of Yaakov's life, and he has all of his children around him, and he's lived to a ripe old age. And in some ways, so much of this ending is a reparative and a hope towards the future, where he gives his children a bracha for achrit hayamim, for the end of days, that they are going to transcend, no matter what their challenges are going to be. These are going to be the nachla. These are going to be the portions of land that are given in Eretz Yisrael and are and will continue on for generations to come. That his, despite his challenges, and maybe because of his challenges, he is able to stand in this space and impart deep words of wisdom to his children and to his grandchildren, which got me thinking about the bracha that he gives to his grandchildren, Menashe and Ephraim. It's a bracha that we say to children nightly, Hamalach HaGoel, and to ourselves before going to bed. Otimi kol ra yivarech et hana'arim v'yikar b'hamashmim b'shem avatai, Abraham v'Yitzchak v'yidgu la'rov b'kerev hearts. That word v'yidgu is actually the only time that word is used in Tanakh, is right here in this week's Parsha. And Rashi comments on, this is our last Rashi. Hopefully you'll learn many, many, many more Rashis, but for our purposes in parenting with Rashi, raising kids with Rashi, this is our last Rashi. As it relates to Parsha inspiration for parenting. I think that Rashi points out here that the word Vayitzgu is actually referring to fish, that Yitzchak is alluding to fish. And the reason that in this particular case, Yaakov gives Ephraim and Menashe the bracha to be like fish is because just like fish are underwater and they are multitude, they multiply, but they're also hidden away from the dangers of the Yetzer Hara, that like almost like the evil eye won't attach to them in being underwater, and they will be able to multitude and be successful and succeed and not face, it almost feels like he's wishing them that they shouldn't have to face those challenges. And I was thinking about, and this gets brought up in lots of different places, the Gemara in Brachot talks about this, the Gemara in Baba Basra talks about this, I think the Bracha in the Gemara in Ketubot, all kind of really kind of constantly are coming back to this idea that's brought up by Rashi, that fish in particular are something that is siman bracha. And it's because it keeps away the evil eye. And so I was thinking about this idea of what does it mean to be human and what does it mean to wish? Because that's what I hear in this, that thinking about his own life, right? Hamalach hagoel oti, the angel that saved me, mikol ra, from all the evil. And if you take a pause and you think about the fact, like, you know what, like Yaakov had a lot of challenges. And I think Rashi there also picks up on the fact that that malach that's referring to is the angels that came when he was coming, when he was leaving Eretz Canaan, and then the angels that switched back. He always had these angels with him. You could also think about it, the angel that he fought with before going and meeting his brother Esav and getting the name change, right? So these angels that protected him from evil. And it's an interesting thing that I was thinking about, this idea that they protected him from evil, right? And now we're thinking about the idea that the bracha that he then gives to his children is that they should be protected from the evil eye. And it's an interesting thing because Yaakov faces challenges. So it seems to be that I guess I would read into it that on the one hand, maybe Yaakov is wishing for his children that they shouldn't have to face challenges. And on the surface, maybe that is what he is hoping for them, that they should not have to be tempted by the evil eye, that the evil eye shouldn't bestow evil upon them, that they should just multitude and ease with siman bracha and kind of go about their way. But on the other hand, he also attributes his own experiences in his life to actually being guarded away from evil. And I'm thinking about the fact that like it's possible that what Yaakov is actually saying in a nuanced way, that my challenges in life are not a result of having an ayin hara on me, for lack of a better terminology. Challenges in life are part of being human. They're part of living in this world. And when we look through the brachot that Yaakov gives to his children, they're all about being human. They're all about the mistakes that they've done. It's all about the strengths that they have and how they can utilize them better. And each one has their own strength. It's all about embracing the idea of being a person who is human in this world. And I'm thinking about this idea that like that I was kind of reading about it as it relates in terms of thinking, you know, taking this idea that we developed in the Parsha and now expanding it and extending it to how we engage in the world as a personhood, but also how we engage as parents, and thinking about the fact that we are human. It said, I love this. It's great to be great, but it's greater to be human, right? It's great to be amazing and to have the highest and loftiest challenge, but it's even greater to just be a human with normal challenges that we all face, and we all have the capacity to face them. Maybe the real ayin hara that Yaakov is attributing to in this bracha is when we feel like we actually can't face our own challenges. It was a great article by Michael Alsey that I saw where he talks about this idea that our ability to recognize that problems are not bad things. We often refer to problems in such a negative way, like, oh my gosh, why do people have so many problems these days? Or why do kids have so many problems these days? We didn't have so many problems, as a negative thing. And instead of thinking about problems as a negative attribute, instead thinking about it as the fact that we all have things that we struggle with. We all have things that we could do better. And when we don't ascribe them to this negative category of problems that are unsolvable and unmanageable, and rather are things that are opportunities to engage with, around, into creative solutions and problem solving, right? If we think of that's the transferring from that negative to a positive, but enabling a lot of creative solutions, that is an opportunity. And so maybe the ayin hara is actually, if we feel stuck by our challenges in life, instead of figuring out ways to surpass them with the creativity and the strengths that Hashem has given each one of us, we make something from nothing, that we take something that is hard, where we feel like we don't have the strength, we don't have the capacity, and we figure out how to make it into something meaningful. It actually connects similarly back, which maybe is further evidence that this is really what Yaakov is suggesting earlier when he's talking to Yosef, and he's kind of sharing with him, you might think and might be angry with me that I'm asking you to bury me, to take my body back from Mitzrayim into Canaan and bury me in Ma'arat HaMachpelah, and I didn't do the same by your mother. Instead, I buried her by the side of the road. And Rashi there points out this idea that Yaakov is sharing with Yosef that I left her intentionally. I made something from nothing, something that was a challenge, something that was painful, something that was hard to imagine that I'm not going to be buried with my beloved wife. And even later, when Yaakov's describing the fact that he wants to be buried in Ma'arat HaMachpelah, and he mentions that Abraham is buried with his wife Sarah, and Yitzchak is buried with his wife Rivka, and then he says, and I should be buried with Leah. He doesn't say my wife Leah, and I think it feels intentional there. It's possible that it's just, he's talking about it with his children, and they know that it's his wife Leah, but I think there's a piece of it that's intentional because his loyalty in terms of a marriage and a wife was clearly with Rachel, and so he's acknowledging the fact that there was something that he had to handle that was a challenge, and he made the best out of it. There was almost like a creative solution that was in front of him, and then it enabled a certain amount of hashgacha with this idea that when the Jewish people so many generations later would come out of Bavel, they would pass by Rachel sees her children coming out of Galut, and she Kiviyachol jumps before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, pleading for them to be able to come back from Galut later, many years later. So I think this idea that Yaakov is really talking about is how do we be human in this world? And I saw three good ideas that I think can very much relate to our experience as parents and our experience as people. One is creating resiliency. And I think one way to think about that is the way in which we actually take care of ourselves. The way we acknowledge, like, I'm feeling very worn down. I'm feeling like I don't have any more bandwidth. And how do I increase my bandwidth? How do I create more space for myself? And in that way of creating more space for myself, I'm also able to create more space for other people, and being able to do the work that I have to do and help other people and be engaged in the world. I think another great idea was building connections with other people, building meaningful connections. I think that not like one and done, but like just calling somebody, reaching out to somebody, having a connection with a person that is a positive connection with somebody, has great value. And the other piece is giving ourselves space and recognizing that we have to slow down and being kind to ourselves. Space, pace, grace. I thought those were great words. Space, pace, grace. Giving ourselves the space to be a person, allowing ourselves to slow down when we need it, and having a certain amount of kindness with ourselves. And I think that in addition to all of those components, I also think about this idea of really trying to move away from this idea of like, oh, just bad things happen to me. I think that's what Yaakov's sending a message also. Sometimes we also hear our kids say, oh, I'm just like, I'm not good at this. SAR, which is our in Riverdale local or Orthodox Jewish Day School, talks a lot about growth mindset. It's a very popular concept that we're not saying I can't do this. We're saying I can't do this yet. I'm not able to do this yet. Even thinking about the ways in which we connect with other people, the bandwidth we have, acknowledging our humanity, acknowledging our humanness, and really trying to think about the ways in which we creatively solve for things that are in front of us that feel like challenges, and looking at them as opportunities. And that's part of being human. Human is that there are challenges in life, there are challenges in moments, there are challenges in relationships. And I think as we sum up the Sefer Breshit, we take a step back and think about the fact that everybody in the book of Breshit faced a challenge, and part of their overcoming their challenges was their ability to confront the situation and come up with a creative solution to make the best out of it. And the people who really actually couldn't do that, you go back to the story of Breshit with Cain and Hevel, the people who couldn't come up with a creative solution within the confines of halakha, within the confines of morality, within the confines of what is right, the ability to apologize, the ability to acknowledge when we did something wrong, the ability to engage with each other with a certain amount of human kindness. I think that is in those spaces, you see that they're not able to move forward. By contrast to our Avot, who have their own challenges, and we're not a religion that paints our leaders as saints. And so we want to bring these discussions to the table to our children. We want to bring these discussions to the table for ourselves. We want to look into the text and think to ourselves, what can we learn from every single moment, opportunity that is being provided for us about how to live our life, that we don't run away from our problems, we face our problems. We don't think of everything that is a challenge to us as something that we will never overcome, and that it's just happening to me and it doesn't happen to anybody else. And it's because I have an ayin hara on me. I grew up in a Sephardi home. People talk about ayin hara all the time. And on the one hand, I think it gives people a sense of like control to disown the things that are going wrong to them, like, oh, it's just an ayin hara. But on the other hand, in my family growing up, if something bad happened, if like two bad things happened, you would break a plate, as if to suggest that like I'm making the bad thing happen. The third bad thing happens because bad things happen in threes. It's so crazy. It's such a crazy concept, but we hold on to ayin haras because they make us feel like we're in control of something, and they make us feel better, and they make us feel like we can put our kind of attribute everything that's going on to something, even if that something doesn't make sense, instead of thinking about the fact that there's nothing to attribute. Hashem runs the world, and we have no way of knowing all the diukim that are being made about how the world is run and why something happens. And as Yosef tells us in last week's parsha, we can't know, and in this week's parsha, you can't know what is going to happen down the line. You have to just have a deep sense of emunah pshuta, that everything happens for a reason, and we try to ground ourselves in the fact that we are human, we are limited, but we have the ability to engage with our human kindness. It's an opportunity to engage in our humanity with a certain sense of kindness, with a certain sense of space, pace, and grace, and to be able to think about creative solutions, because that's the opportunity that we were given, the ability to be creative. We go back to where we started. Hashem imbued man with the ability to create. That's what makes us unique. It's not just creating life, it's creating opportunities for change, opportunities to rectify situations, opportunities to get creative and make situations that feel impossible better, and to have opportunities where we felt like we didn't handle it right the first time, and we can come back and do it. So I think really taking a step back, looking at Sefer Bereshit as a book that teaches us about how to be human, that we are given a guideline for how to embrace our humanity, and for how to do it with kindness, with a certain amount of respect, with a certain amount of humility and humbleness, and to also know that somebody's done it before us. Our great avos have done every challenge that we have: jealousy, anger, sibling rivalry. They've done it all before us, and just as they were successful, just as Yaakov said, "Hamalach hagoel oti," just like that angel protected him, so Yaakov is asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Malachim to also guide us and protect us, that we should continue to, both in our own lives, as people, as parents, as spouses, as children, whatever role we play in this world, to continue to engage in the world with the recognition of our humanity, and to engage in the world with the ability to recognize that we have the greatest power of creativity. And with that creativity comes the ability to change our current situation in any given moment in time. Okay, Parsha treats. So I kind of updated this a little bit. Now I'm really like going back. I'm like, what did I do last year? So last year I actually did the hands for Ephraim and Menashe, and I did some cookies for the end of the Parsha for finishing Sefer Shemot. As everyone knows, you can always do Torah oodles. I'm like a very big fan of that. Put them on your table. It's great. It's awesome. I also think that like you can do a lot of fun things with all the different brachot. Last year, I think I went a little dark. I like got all these like mummies. Feels very creepy as I'm looking at it now, but I totally get where my head was going. It also happens to me that I know that the mummy heads didn't stay on. So like it feels a little bit creepier, but these were chocolate mummies. And they were because Yaakov specifically asked Bnei Israel to go back and bury him in Canaan. However, he is mummified, as was the custom in Mitzrayim. I also think you could do anything related to ayin hara. So that was really what we talked about, and the idea of thinking about what it means to have an ayin hara or not have an ayin hara and have an ayin tov. And so I think there's lots of things that you could do in this week's parsha. So wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a wonderful week, and good luck with your parsha treats.